Welcome to Backstage with Richard Ridge. SAG-AFTRA Foundation and BroadwayWorld continue their filmed Conversation Q&A series, which celebrates the vibrant theater community here in New York City. This event, which is coming from the Robin Williams Center, is a very special career conversation with the most honored director-producer in the history of the American theater. He is the recipient of 21 Tony Awards and is back on Broadway this season at Manhattan Theater Club with the musical that celebrates his illustrious 70-year career called Prince of Broadway. Please welcome Hal Prince. Well, first of all, thank you so much for sitting with me. You know, I have to tell you, Hal, growing up, my parents took me every year to a Broadway show, and it was always a Hal Prince show.
I don't believe it.
Oh, yes. They told me that I would be entertained to the highest level, and I would learn about something or a subject that I didn't know. So as we start off, I want to thank you for that, sir.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, now, welcome back to Broadway this season with Prince of Broadway. What have you enjoyed the most about working on this show?
Well, I backed into it. I think I better say that right away. I didn't desire to do an advertisement for myself. And I sort of decided a week ago, this is the last occasion that I'm going to do anything like this. I'm a director, and it's uneasy doing advertisements for yourself. But I backed into it because a Canadian impresario asked me to do such a show. And I thought, sure, I'll do it. And then he ducked it because it was too expensive. So now I'd been working on it. And the whole deal was really to illustrate that I think the two sentences that mean the most that are expressed on the stage, one is you can take an audience anywhere, and you can. You don't have to talk down to an audience, and I think there's an awful lot of talking down, a lot of trying to figure out what the formula is that makes a success. As close as I could ever get to that is surprise them. The other sentence in the show that means something to me is something my wife said to me. After a number of years being married, she said, "I'm so sick of you saying that Follies was a flop. It was one of the best things you've ever done. It was a success. You've got to distinguish between hit and flop, were box office terms, and success and failure, which is artistic terms." And I so loved that, and I've lived with that in my heart somewhere ever since she said it. And I believe it. I believe it. So though you were mentioning a bunch of shows that were flops, i.e. Pacific Overtures, it was a success as far as I was concerned. It was a very dangerous and adventurous show, and I thought we pulled it off. Did I ever think it would be a success on Broadway? Not really. I know enough about Broadway not to think that. There are certain shows you do that you'll run out of your audience at some point. But your audience can be just, West Side Story ran a year and a half with a break in the middle for 6 months to go to Chicago and come back. The movie was everything. The film was later. People knew what West Side Story was by the time the film was done, and suddenly it was an international success. And now, of course, it's played everywhere, including in opera houses. But not then. That was something new. However, well worth doing. Cabaret, same experience. It ran 3 years. But the film was the best film of the year, as was West Side, and interestingly enough, it became an international film. So I think we sometimes are ahead of of what they do in films and so on. Sometimes film are ahead of us, but it matters what you're doing, and certainly. astonishing them, which is a Diaghilev phrase. He said, astonish me, is a pretty good standard by which to develop projects for audiences.
Yeah, because you have always surrounded yourself with talents that work at the same level as you do, and this show is no exception, Prince of Broadway. What has it been like collaborating with this team and once again with your co-director and choreographer, Susan Stroman?
Well, Stro is endlessly imaginative and terrific, and among the most cheerful collaborators that ever lived. She's just, I'd love to needle her sometime and find out whether there's a temper somewhere. I haven't seen it, and she's a perfect collaborator. Tommy Thompson did the choosing the words selectively, and the set designer, Beowulf Borrett, and William Ivy Long did the costumes. They are spectacular. I threw the worst task at them in the world. I said, I want the scenery and the costumes to look as close to the original as possible. And there was a reason for that. Though I don't remember what I staged, and I couldn't possibly dredge up memories. So we did each number and each segment as if it was a brand new piece of material. I spend as much time dealing with scenery and costumes as text. And so I usually put a scenic designer on at the same time we're developing the project. And so I couldn't visit every single one of 17 musicals. We have 17 musicals on that stage, and very often full stage sets. It's a kind of a brilliant job of design, but those designs are familiar to me. And it takes me 6 months to come up with the way a show should look. So I couldn't possibly have done that with 17 shows.
You've assembled a stellar cast of 9. What did you look for when you were casting? Because your cast is flawless in this show.
Yeah, I think so too. I think they're the 9 most talented people I've ever worked with. Now, I've worked with other people equally talented, but these 9 people they do probably on average 3 huge segments in which they are perfectly cast. But if you can find somebody perfectly cast to play Amalia in She Loves Me and Sally Bowles in Cabaret, it's astonishing. And Brianna can do that. And Emily Skinner can do that. They all can do that. That's protean stuff. I can't imagine. It's going to be hell when we take it elsewhere, which we will, hopefully all over the world, and then around the country. It's going to be hell to recast. But there is nobody more talented than the talented people working on Broadway. And that's changed in my lifetime. I've been around long enough to know that there was a time when you had a singing chorus, a dancing chorus, usually 12 or 14 of each, and then leading actors, stars. And the stars were all great personalities who could not sing or dance, as well as the chorus people. So the singers came on, and then they left the stage, and the dancers took over, and then they left. And then came West Side Story. And Jerry Robbins insisted that everybody do everything. And that was a huge gift to the theater, but a gift to all those people working in the musical theater, because now they have to sing and dance and act. So 9 people can do what normally 27 at minimum would have to do.
They're brilliant. What I love the most about Prince of Broadway is watching the progression of how you help change and further the face and shape of the American musical theater. Was that one of the goals you had when you were putting the show together?
No.
Or just played out that way? Yeah.
No, I was just trying to express myself.
Yeah.
No, what happened really was I hated musicals. I thought musicals were just stupid. And they were. Musicals when I was a kid were except for Showboat and odd exceptions, Porgy and Bess is not really a musical, it's an opera. But they were there when I was a kid. However, most musicals were collections of terrific songs from the Gershwins, from Porter, from Rodgers and Hart, linked together by crazy, silly books. I have two examples of that. One is a musical called Something for the Boys with Ethel Merman, Cole Porter score, big hit. And it was during World War II, so the plot was essentially about how Merman got graphite on her teeth and Nazi spies could send messages out through her mouth. And the other one was a show of Rodgers and Hart's that George Abbott directed called Too Many Girls. And Too Many Girls was about a college called Potawatomi. There's actually a place called Potawatomi. I didn't know that till fairly recently in the Middle West. And the girls all wear beanies, signifying that they're virgins. That was something that Desi Arnaz said to somebody else in the show. Why are they wearing beanies? Oh, that's it. So the whole plot turned on the fact that the leading lady who wore a beanie through the first act came out in the second act without a beanie. So we know that someone had nailed her. And that was the plot of that huge hit. However, both shows had great scores. Yeah. And that's what musicals did. By the time I was becoming a producer, music was no longer the popular music of theater. Theater music was no longer popular. There was R&B and jazz, rock and roll, big time. And so the popular music was elsewhere. So inadvertently almost, you could address subjects that you could never address before. And Steve Sondheim could write text that could be really advanced character and plot and so on. And that was a new opening for all of us. A fellow who never liked musicals could finally do a musical about a subject that he really was interested in because it was not a traditional musical subject. So a lot of the shows I did subsequently, first as a producer, certainly West Side, and then as a director, were not normal musical material given the 30s, 40s, and even early 50s.
I love that. I never knew Something for the Boys. I never realized that. She got graphite on her teeth.
That was that was the plot.
That was the book. Well, let's talk about your book. You also have a brand new book called Sense of Occasion, where you look back and assess your 70-year and counting career.
Actually, I'm lying. It was only about 62 or 4.
Fabulous. With creating some of the most famous landmark musicals. For our audiences, if you love the American musical theater and you want to know how it's done from the greatest director-producer, then you have to get this book. How did you come about writing it, Hal?
Well, it was unfinished business, really. What happened was, when I was a young man, in my late 20s, early 30s, I became a successful producer. And beyond my wildest dreams. And the editor of Harper's Magazine, a very estimable, Harper's in Atlantic are the best, called me and said, you should write a book. And I said, I'm 30 or something. He said, no, you should write a book. So we met and had a lunch, and I said, sure. And then I got chicken, and I didn't write the book. I just kept writing him notes saying, I'm writing the book. And, but then finally, I decided I'd write it. And so in 1974, it came out. It was called Contradictions. And it deals with everything up to 1974, and including 74. I guess it was 73. Anyway, there's a whole lot of shows, many more shows from 74 to now than before. So I thought you really, it's sort of like you stopped at a little night music or something, and maybe you should set the record straight. Also, it was an opportunity to address what's happened to the theater, because a lot has happened to the theater. The other most important line in Prince of Broadway is when someone says, Follies was the most expensive musical of its time, ever done. It cost $800,000. And the audience, always the wise ones in the audience went, oh. Well, the fact is, you can't do a one-character play, a solo play on Broadway for $800,000. So in the interim years, from 1971 to now, the escalation in cost has been extraordinary. And I don't particularly want to address that because I think a lot of it is probably due to the fact that no one ever wanted or would want to take a strike, because you can keep these theaters going all the time. And now, of course, we've inherited a new theater where everything runs 15 weeks. When you do a show at Manhattan Theater Club, you're good for 12 to 15 weeks. We've just been extended, that's great. But that's it. And that's fine, but you know what you're getting into. Now, of course, you do know what you're getting into. You're a Hollywood star. You go to Broadway for 12 weeks or 14 weeks, and the show closes. And what they think they're doing, the investors, the producers of these shows, because the producers are now the investors. That never was so. I couldn't have put a nickel in Pajama Game. I was making $75 a week as a stage manager, and happy to do so. But now, all these producers are investors. And so they bet on a movie star coming in for 12 to 14 weeks, and that the show will pay off and make a small profit. It's like a guarantee. Well, that has nothing to do with the theater as far as I'm concerned. And I do disapprove of it, actually, because it's cost us something. Too many people now are saying, sure, I'll come to Broadway for 14 weeks, and not even movie stars. And you see, when we did a show, it was not uncommon to sign a cast for a year and a half. Right off the bat, you signed a contract for a year and a half, and you were damn grateful for it. And the likes of Ethel Merman and Mary Martin would take a Broadway show, and if it was a hit, stay with it the length of its run on Broadway, and then go on the road for 4 or 5 years on one show, because Annie Get Your Gun was worth that trouble. And that's not true anymore. You can't get anybody to stay more than a year. And then they're out looking for a show again. It's not advantageous.
But you were a creative producer. Is that something that's lacking?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure, there are creative producers, no question, but fewer. And because none of us financed the shows we did. So two things. One thing, observation worth making is when I went to theater, and I went to theater more than I go to theater now, I would sit down, and if I looked at the stage and didn't look at the program first, I could tell you who produced that show because of the nature of their taste, And that was very easy. There were fewer Martin shows and Abbott shows, of course, but then there were Theater Guild shows and playwrights shows. And they were not, I mean, Playwrights Horizon, I mean, Playwrights Company. The group of playwrights got together and said, we want to produce our shows. Well, they couldn't have financed them either. So we did backers auditions. Now they do them anyway. They do workshops. We never did a workshop in our lives. And the quality of the shows did not betray that at all. There are two things that you might assume, and wrongly. We did a show a year, and some of the shows we did in a year were Company, Follies, Night Music, well, Cabaret. I opened a show with Kander and Ebb that I did not direct called Flora the Red Menace, which turned out to be a disaster. And I sort of knew it when we were in Boston. So I said to the guys the day before the opening on Broadway, will you come to my office tomorrow, the day after the opening, and we'll meet at 10, I have a project. And it was Cabaret. And that opened almost a year to the day. Pajama Game opened in April. Damn Yankees opened almost to the same week a year later. And Rodgers and Hart and Porter and Gershwin's, all those people were used to shows running only a season. That's how much audience there was for a Broadway show. The reason that something like Phantom is running 30 years now is that we get a huge audience from all over the world. Nobody from all over the world ever went to Broadway, and now they do. And it's affected the projects we have. A Phantom, Lion King, those shows are running because you don't have to know the language. You can look at the show, hear the music, and understand the story.
You started producing with the late, great Robert Griffiths. And, you know, when you started producing, there was already a slew of very successful producers working on Broadway. What did you and Robert think that you could do that was different from what other producers were already doing that would make you two stand out?
Well, it started with arrogance. You see, I really was, I really was 24 as a stage manager backstage. Yeah. And we were on Wonderful Town, which is a huge hit with Rosalind Russell in the cast. And I'd stand on the wrong side of the stage because he called the cues and I did it once in a while. And I'd say, well, this is awfully easy what they just did. They got George Abbott to direct a musical. They got Comden and Green and Bernstein to write the show. Why the hell can't we do that? And I whispered that to Bobby Griffith, who was about 30 years older than I don't know exactly what, but plenty. And he'd been a production stage manager all his life. And he said, you really want to do this? I said, yeah. And so one day he called me and he was doing, for Leland Hayward, he was doing the Ford 50th anniversary show. And he said, there's a book review in the Times, read it. If you like it, I can't read it. Do something about it. So I read the book review in the Times. It was a book called 7.5 Cents, which became The Pajama Game. And it was about a strike in a pajama factory. What could make me happier than a strike? You know, I wanted musicals to go to strikes and pajama factories and the Middle West. And so I read it, and that very day, I made an appointment to the agent for the book, Harold Matson, and we went in. I said, Bobby, take a half hour off and we went, it was in Rockefeller Center, and we went to his office, and we said, we want to do this as a musical. And he said, well, I've already had an offer from Leland Hayward and from an offer from elsewhere, because it's that kind of a book. And we said, yes, but what if we gave you George Abbott? And he said, can you? And we said, we'll see. So we went right back, and George Abbott said, sure, I'll do it. And And then we started to put a dream team together. Asked Frank Lesser to write the music. He refused. But he said, I have 2 kids who I think are great. So we hired the 2 kids, Adler and Ross, and they were great. We asked Jerry Robbins to choreograph, and he said no. Joan McCracken, who was a Abbott favorite dancer, said, my husband's a choreographer. And who is he? Well, his name is Bob Fosse. So, first show. All these people's first show. So it was like that. But then I had some input, if I say so myself, because I'm hipped on this scenery thing. And I thought it has to have the integrity of, well, Oklahoma. So Lem Ayres was a great designer. We got him, and he's one of the hardest designers to get, and we got him. And then we thought, we got to get a book writer. And I thought, let's get Bill Enge, because he'd written Picnic, and he knew the Middle West. Bill toyed with the idea and then turned us down. So ultimately, we ended up with the author, Richard Bissell, of the book, and George Abbott, who agreed to collaborate with him. Abbott was a great collaborator. And so we took compromises every way, not so much in the Abbott department, but we did, and it all worked out. However, I knew that I was very ambitious, far more than I am today. And I knew that we had to have a hit. First time out, had to have a hit. And now I'm going to answer your question. So we had to not only have a hit, but we had to deal with that hit in a way that separated us off from all the other very successful producers of musicals. And there were a lot of them, Fear and Mine, all over the place. So 2 things fed into that. In terms of the scenic, of the choreography, I didn't know that Bob Fosse could do it. I just was told by his wife that he could do it, and George Abbott believed his wife. Well, she was right, actually. But I said, do you mind if I ask Jerry Robbins, we'll pay him to just sit on the sidelines in case we need him. And Abbott said, no, of course, you're the producers. So we went to Jerry, and Jerry said, no, I don't want to do that. I want to be a director on Broadway. He had not yet directed. And so I have to have co-directing credit. So I didn't do anything about it. Abbott said one day, whatever happened to Jerry Robbins? I said, oh, well, he passed. He said, really, what happened? And I said, well, he wanted to get co-directing credit. And Abbott said, oh, give it to him. Everybody will know who directed this show. And that's precisely what happened.
My final question is, what is the best bit of advice that you've been given, either personally or professionally, that you live by?
I think the final song in Prince of Broadway says it all. Do the work. And we had a hard time getting that final song because, Jason Robert Brown is a great composer, great lyricist, and he wrote paeans and anthems to, the greater part of creativity and so on. And it didn't smack right. This, just do the work, pal. And he took pal from me. And that's what it is. Just do the work.
Well, I want to tell you, this has been a bucket list for me to sit with you and do an incredible interview with you. And I want to thank you for all the many musicals that you've given all of us and millions of theater goers around the world through your incredible 70-year career.
May I have the last word?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you.
Mr. Harold Prince.